is a writer and also a board member and ridiculously talented guy. This is Justin Barisish, everyone. And I'm going to get out of the way.
Benji, you're never in the way, but thank you for the intro. Thank you to Mickey and Zach, who are going to join us now on screen as well. Yes, I am your moderator for this evening. I'll be asking questions and trying to string thoughts along in the conversation as well. But my job really is to get these two gentlemen here, these dapper gents and their funny selves talking. So I will be prompting them with questions, and we will mostly hear from them this evening. So first, we have our executive director, which is Zachary Steele, founder of the Broadleaf Writers Association. And we're also joined by Mickey Dubrow, novelist, writer, comedian, written for TV shows, as well as many books. And me, why am I talking tonight? Why am I here doing this thing? I did some satire writing myself in college, right? And I fell in love with it. And that was actually my first exposure to it, was when I toured the campus, picked up the paper, and I was like, oh, this is funny. This is good. This is actually writing that I enjoy, not the crappy newspaper that the campus usually puts out. And it was more incisive and more, I don't know, it said something more than just like, and then this person graduated, and then this person like dropped their hamburger or whatever. Like, it was useful. It was interesting information with a different insight. And so, fellas, my first question to you is, what was your very first exposure to satire, right? Let's just see, like, what got you into this?
The first thing that I remember is actually was Mel Brooks' History of the World Part One. And I kind of fell in love with Mel Brooks after that. But I enjoyed so much taking elements of real life, in this case, history, and just making parody and lampooning it, but also trying to get a point across through it while making people laugh the whole time. So I was hooked from that point on.
For me, it was Mad Magazine, and especially the Mort Drucker satires of movies and things like that. And then when I started out like in high school trying to do a satirical cartoon, and I would write and draw these cartoons, and then they would always get banned because, which I thought was great, because looking back at them now, I see I think they were banned because they weren't funny. I don't think it's because of anything I was saying.
Well, okay, that's a question we'll circle back to later. But so thank you for sharing your first instances with us as wee babes in the world, finding your way to the pit of satire, or the hill, whatever way you want to look at it. So with that very easy softball question, I'm going to take you in the exact opposite direction, right? We're going to start this deep philosophical discussion here of, what is the goal of satire, right? Like, when you write this, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to get done? What is it that you were writing towards? People throw around the phrase of punching up, right? And we can talk more about that. But is there something that satire should do? Is there something that satire shouldn't do? What is its goal?
Well, it's definitely social commentary. It's the classic jester saying things to the king that that the common people can't say, and I do think it should punch up. I think it's wrong when it punches down. If it's someone who can't defend themselves, then why are you making fun of them? But if it's someone who is hurting people or hurting society in some way, it's almost like your duty to speak out.
The social commentary is definitely a big aspect of that. For me, I always seem to try to find the funny and the frustrating, something that vexes me, that I have to be able to find the humor in it to be able to to understand it better, and B, to be able to get my point across, because I'm not one to get out and go, oh, we got to do this, we got to rally around this. I'd rather try to take something that frustrates me and turn it into something funny so I can entertain people while getting my point across.
Yeah, so I'm an English major, and forgive me as I nerd out here for a second, but when we were taking classes, the whole point of the Romantics was to delight and instruct, right? That whole movement of literature. And I don't know if satire really arises from there, but for me, that always was very interesting, right? I shouldn't just say something. I should say something with a reason, and to make you enjoy it, right? And to remember it. And so I think satire, it tells the news, but it tells the news in a better way, right? A more interesting way, a more memorable way. And so, yes, exactly to your point, Mickey, of punching up, right? Somebody's already on the ground. leave that man alone. He doesn't need anybody to make his life worse, right? But so to return to that question, a point you had brought up earlier, Mickey, about your cartoons, right? But they weren't funny, you said. Does the satire necessarily need to make you laugh out loud, or can it achieve that goal without getting, without technically being quote unquote funny?
You're right, it doesn't. But I think at the time, the thing that was wrong with those cartoons at that time was I just was trying to rattle cages and speak out and get attention. I didn't really know what the message was. And so that's why it didn't work. And really why it wasn't funny, because I didn't understand what it was why I was angry, or if I was even angry at all. I think I was just trying to get attention. And I think that's just sort of annoying. So it starts to be funny and it starts to be important when you understand what it is you're critiquing. And I think that's when it starts to get a little deeper and it doesn't have to be funny at that point. You're right.
Zach, thoughts?
No, I think Mickey's got it. I mean, I don't think that it necessarily has to be funny in order to be effective. Otherwise, I'll stop there, because otherwise I'm just going to repeat what he said, and it was very well done.
No, so I took improv classes for a while, and it's a close cousin of satire, I'd say, right? It's just more in a physical versus a written form, or they can be one and the same, right? You can act out a satire or something. And one of the lessons they always teach you is that improv, it is to tell a story. And if you get a laugh, then even better. But the goal is not to laugh, right? The goal is to make an audience stay engaged with something that you're making up on the spot. And I'd say satire can work effectively without a bit of laughter as well, right? As long as you're telling a good story, as long as you're getting somebody to critically think about, well, that's some BS that somebody with more power, more money, more prestige is doing to somebody beneath him. Not cool. Knock him down a peg, right? Like, how do we do that effectively? So thank you. So it seems like we're all on the same page here. Yay. So let's dig a little deeper into that big philosophical question I just chucked in the arena there. So let's get different shades of meaning here, right? So we hear the word satire tossed around, which is kind of the main title of this presentation this evening. We also hear sarcasm, and then stand-up comedy kind of gets blended in there, and then slapstick, right? And these are all fun S words, yay. Poetry, but are they all the same? Are they all different? Are they shades of the same thing? Are there distinct differences? Let's get granular here. And Zach, I'm going to pick on you first.
For me, there's obvious differences just in definition of each of those and in methodology of comedy, but I still feel like a lot of it in comedy in general is still doing the same thing. And I think some of the best, for example, stand-up is done about very real topics in life, whether you're talking religion, philosophy, or whether you're talking about, mental disorders, whatever it happens to be. People who can effectively almost teach you about something while making you laugh is a great way. And in satire and all of that seems to be the same. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what was up there.
Yeah, and the closest I can get it, I feel like that sarcasm, stand-up, and slapstick are tools that satire can use. I think you can do all those three things without doing satire, but I think satire can use them as tools. And when I think about slapstick, I swear there was a Three Stooges short where they were, they kept making fun of Hitler, and I think they kept smacking his picture and things like that. So it just kind of shows that even slapstick can be used satirically.
Yeah, I mean, and which is funny because slapstick is generally seen as like a lower form of comedy, right? It's very, very stupid almost, but really not, right? If you're paying attention to it, it's just like you said, another tool to take down the man, right?
Well, I will add to that though that
yeah.
If my mother were here, she would actually take the time to say that sarcasm is something entirely separate from all three of those, having had to raise me as a child, and dealing with the sarcasm. I think that might actually be the one thing that stands out of those three for me, because it really is just cracking, more than it is trying to have a point. I could have led with, I don't know, Justin, that was a great question, wasn't it? And that's not social commentary at all. That's just, I don't know, making you feel bad. I don't know what it is, but
Zach is being an ass, right?
Yes, exactly. Like,
Just
no,
keep
it's
it, "Oh,
sarcasm. You're
really?"
supposed to appreciate it. It's funny. Go ahead.
So,
I'm sorry.
oh, Mickey, you had something?
No, I just imagine him going, "Oh, really? You think it is? Huh?"
Yeah. No, I was the kid that when my mom said crack the window, I'd turn around and act like I was hitting it with a bat. So, she had her fill with me. So
Just remembering from like the late 80s, 90s. It's like, you're so cool. Not like the very,
not
very derivative, basic form of that. Like, oh, that's how we know satire and sarcasm now. Okay.
yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
so I guess that's a good little pivot there. So, I mean, do you find that you are naturally sarcastic, therefore you're naturally drawn to satire, or is it you were drawn to satire and thus have become sarcastic, right? Is it chicken egg kind of thing there, or does it not
I,
matter?
I I don't think there was a point in my life. I don't know. They say that the a child generally doesn't have the mental capacity to understand sarcasm until they're about 12. Now, I will
Okay.
challenge that, having both lived it and experienced it from kids that are much younger than 12. So I would just say that side of me, for whatever reason, was always there. And I think that was always my gateway to humor, and opened me up to wanting to understand other forms of humor.
And I wasn't a particularly sarcastic kid. I think it was comic books and cartoons and things like that that attracted me.
Mm.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. In the comments over here, Jessica is putting some nuggets of gold and says, it depends on how you weaponize the sarcasm. The Greeks believed that sarcasm could kill,
Mhm.
which, they believed a lot of things. Throw some hemlock in there, you never know. You can kill one of your greatest philosophers. Um, so let's transition a little bit from sort of a bigger talk, and then we just have our shades of meaning to writing, right? Talk about writing satire, humor, whatever, right? A lot of people agree that humor writing is the hardest, right? Both for an audience, but even more so, I'd say, for in a book, right, in text form, where you don't know your audience, they're not in front of you, you don't immediately get the laugh or the groan or the crickets if it fails, right? So how do you achieve that? How do you do humor well in writing, right? Everybody's definition of funny is different. So how do you do it? How do you overcome it?
I read it out loud to somebody, either to myself or to someone else. I always start with, do I find it funny? But then, just because I find it funny doesn't mean it is, but that's sort of the starting point. And then I try to share it with someone and see how it lands. I have to I'm going to butt in on you a little bit. I have to tell this story about humor being subjective. I was talking
Sure.
to a book club about American Judas. And at one point I asked them what they felt about the use of humor in the book. And there was a moment of silence and they said, well, could you give us an example? And I did. And they said, oh, we just thought that was world building. We didn't know you were trying to be funny. And the thing is, they got the book, they got the story, but they didn't think it was funny at all. And I realized they were right. I mean, the humor was world building, but no, they didn't think it was funny at all.
It's subjective, definitely. I agree with Mickey in terms of reading it. I think first of all, the worst thing you can do in whether you're trying to write it or trying to be it, is don't try to be funny. It does need to be funny to you, but just because it's funny to you, as Mickey points out, doesn't mean that it's going to be funny to other people. It may just be something that's just personally funny to you. But if whether comedy is your jam or not, finding somebody who does get humor, somebody who enjoys even your style of humor, give them a shot. And whether you're reading it out loud to them or letting them read it. But if you are letting them read it, do not stand there waiting for the punchline so you can go, because you're going to be very disappointed. They may not laugh.
Or you're going to bias the laugh, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a pity
Come
laugh.
on, just give me a giggle. Give me something. That's funny. Let's read it back. Let's do it again. I'll explain
Do it
it.
again.
Which by the way, there's a line from Mark Twain, and it's something like, the more you explain it, the more I don't understand it. So if you have to explain your humor,
So nuggets to take away there, people. Shop your ideas to folks, read them out loud, and don't explain your shit. If it doesn't land,
Yes.
it doesn't land.
It's funny or it isn't.
So great question now in that. So how do you, given that advice, how does one become funny, right? Like how do you get better at telling jokes or writing jokes and putting them in your writing, or even just a funny scene, right? If you're not good at the one-offs, how do you do that if the goal is to not try to be funny, but you want to be funny, right? How does one achieve that?
If again, we come back to like, if humor is your thing, then it probably rolls off a little more naturally. If it's something you're trying to inject and you're not quite comfortable with it, I think one, having somebody who is good will be really helpful for you. I also think that if you want to write something that has humor to it, that you might need to immerse yourself in some of the comedy greats a little bit just to get the feel for it. But I still I don't think you can just suddenly become funny. I think you have to take, whether it's a character or a situation, and find the humor in it, and exploit that.
And also, when you start out, it helps to just steal from others, emulate people you like. And because I always think about, Eddie Murphy talking about when he first started out, he was basically Richard Pryor Jr.
Yeah.
So he finally developed his own style.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, you steal really to learn, and then you kind of develop your own style after that.
And that's a common piece of advice from older writers to younger ones, right? To copy their stuff until you figure out your own, right?
Mhm.
And just don't claim it as your own, right? Just don't steal their ideas, but take their voice, right, and try to emulate it, and then find your own through doing so.
Yeah.
Mimic the greats, as they were saying in the chat over there.
I think what the thing they say is, steal from the best.
Yeah.
But don't steal from bad people, because your stuff.
True. Make sure you got a good source there. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go a little bit further there. So we're going to talk about comedic timing and pacing, which sounds similar but are different, right? So timing is in, like, when you're telling a joke, right? You can pause for dramatic effect, a pregnant pause, let it land, stretch out a verb or whatever, right? Make a tonal change. You can't do that in the written word, right? So how do you master comedic timing? And then we'll talk about pacing in a second.
Well, it's the same thing for any kind of writing, in that you do pace the story, and the way you, stories have a rhythm, and it's just working in the comedic timing into the rhythm of the story, so that as they're reading it along, you put the punchline in at the right moment. And it's kind of a general writing technique, and it takes time. You're right. It takes, for a long time it won't work, and then finally.
And if you think of it from a visual medium, that things like, okay, so whether I'm talking about the Philadelphia story, which is just a lot of zinging back and forth, or in any just other basic comedy where there's lulls, or there's mannerisms, or there's something in the background kind of thing. I think trying to translate that to writing, if I just get into detail and not worry about the actual language, requires a good use of, whether it's punctuation or descriptive action, because there can be comedy within an action just as much as there can be comedy within the words. And I may overuse ellipses trying to get there, but you can always go back and edit that afterward.
I've become a lover of the em dash. So everybody's got their preferred punctuation that does them in. Okay, so thank you, Zach, for that. That punctuation comment is those are your breaks, or those are your breaths in a piece, right? And so use those to your advantage. I think that's a nugget for somebody to take home today. So evolving on that, and Mickey sort of touched on it a second ago, is the comedic pacing, right? So, my mom always taught to me, but it's like cursing, right? Like if you drop an F-bombs left and right, they're not going to have any efficacy. They're not going to mean anything when somebody hears you say one. If you don't curse often, and then suddenly you do, like you got somebody's attention. Oh my God, what's going on? What's wrong? Whatever, right? It's like crying wolf a bunch, and then suddenly you do it, nobody cares. So with that in mind, like how do you handle comedic pacing, right? Like you can't just have an onslaught of misery. You can't have an onslaught of comedy. They will both get diluted if you do so. So when is it appropriate to throw the audience a comedic bone, right? Give them some relief. How do you feel that out?
No, for me, it either feels right or it doesn't. I think probably because I've done it so much at this point. But you had said something at pacing, and I kind of wanted to address that because, like there are three general rules and I'm not going to get into the detail of all these, but three general rules of comedy, and like inversion, repetition, and like a comedic paradox kind of thing. And repetition is the one that I think probably addresses your question more, because like how often can you do something before, because you're talking about the F-bomb, that's what made me think of that. How often can you do something before it just becomes unfunny? It's just not funny anymore. And that kind of winds me into the rule of three. And that's not just a comedy thing, that's in marketing, it's in everything, because as human beings, we need a grouping to be able to understand something. Like if I say 3 and 6, what's the next number, versus 3 and 6 and 9, what's the next number? I'm looking for 12, where you wouldn't have known that before. So with repetition, if you kind of work off of the rule of three and try not to mention things or go back to things more than that, then you avoid the overkill. And that, of course, obviously goes right into like a singular joke as well.
And I think for me, it's like I concentrate more on the story, and then and then it's a matter of feel. It's like, if I'm feeling really tense and feeling like, oh my God, this is really a difficult moment and it could use a little levity, then that's when I'll put something humorous in. Or if it just feels natural that this would be something funny would happen here. But I think I've over the years I've gotten more intuitive about it.
And so, Zach, you had mentioned this at the top of the call, sort of infusing humor into the darkest or most dangerous of times, right? Talk to me a little bit more about that. Like, is it, I don't know, like when is it a feel? You mentioned that it's a feel, but it's also like, this is like, if you're planning your novel, right? You're planning for something, right? Like here, we're gonna go from the cave. We're gonna go find the dragon. We're gonna go kill him, right? We're gonna go attack him and get the gold, right? As you're getting to the dragon, it gets scary, and then it's just like, do we need some comedic relief there? Is it something to give us a chance of a respite, to like take a breather before we do the big thing?
Yeah.
Is it, we're about to die, so we need to take a moment to just realize the severity of the situation? Like, is it all the above?
Yeah, I think situationally, there are times you definitely don't want to get into humor. Like, like if somebody's got well, I was say knife to your throat, but then I've seen comedy with that too. But so there's like, oh yeah, characters. If you're going to try to write a story where you have those moments of humor in the dark times, then you need to have a character that plays the jester. You have to have the character that is the fool. He's not an idiot. She's not an idiot. It's not an idiot. But it establishes that that's what that person does. And everything that I write, again, you come back to like the rule of three characters. If I talk about Harry Potter, you got Harry, Hermione, and Ron is the jester, kind of thing. Star Trek, you have Kirk, McCoy, and Spock, and McCoy is the jester. You establish that character is likely to be finding humor in everything, so that when you have that heated moment and they make some wisecrack about a dragon, of course, kind of thing, that it doesn't come out of left field. It fits the character, so it fits the story. It fits the moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add anything. That was a pretty good answer. So what he said.
I don't sign off. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be here all night.
That was it. I'm going to mute myself the rest of the time.
No, that's yeah, that's very smart, right? You have a character built in so that it feels appropriated. It's not out of left field, like, it's too much, it's too tense here, right? Like you've sort of built up that, quote unquote, you built up that trust with the reader from the very beginning, so that when you need that person to pay off with that big release, he can or she can, and it's fitting.
And I do, and to add to that, I do think that it is important to be able to infuse humor in those kind of moments, because you are trying to, just from a writing standpoint, you're trying to create an ebb and flow with the tension, and throughout the story, and not always broken up with humor, but that can be a way to do it, whether it's calm or whether they're in the heat of action.
And I think your phrase of, and you said it very quickly, but it's a very astute observation is that that character you're creating is somebody who always finds the humor in the situation, not somebody going out of their way to be funny, but like, yeah, we're here now. Here's something interesting you might not have seen about it, and it's kind of comedic, right? It's a natural thing, harkening back to your earlier point. And Mickey, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, and you brought it up earlier that sometimes it's that release that you need, that you've built up a really tense moment, and the reader needs a moment to have a release, to sort of relax and be able to keep going on.
I think I started noticing that more in a very different genre, in horror movies, right? I am not into horror, but my fiance is. And so she's been making me watch more of these. Whenever it's movie night, she votes and my vote loses. But watch a lot of horror movies, and they do a very good job of that, where it's the good ones, that is, right? Like Jordan Peele, his movies like Us, and what's the one with the underground? Oh, I'm blanking. I'm blanking at the moment, but anyway,
Get Out.
Get Out. Thank you. That was the other one. It's almost like it's a comedic movie with scary elements, or a scary movie with comedic elements. It feels like a nice blend of both, which catches you off guard because you're laughing, you're like letting your guard down, and suddenly, oh, something died or something come in and got you, and you're like, I didn't expect that. It scares you more, right? And I think those best books, the best writing, movies, whatever, are a beautiful blend of both, right? A balanced blend of both. To your point right there, releasing some of that tension. So we had talked a second ago about some of the elements of satire, and we started talking about some of the rules, right, as well. One of the ones I had learned before, not to say I do it, but I learned about it, was the rule of sevens. And Zach, you talked about the rule of threes, which is, yes, totally. It's funny what your examples were great, because you're like, oh, I never thought about that, but it's been right in front of me all along, right? It's just that natural, it's built in. Another one is the rule of sevens, which is the rule of three, but a little bit further. And so it's where things will purposefully do the funny thing once, then you hear it and it's funnier, and then it loses efficacy, and then it comes back again. For whatever reason, on the seventh hit is when it's funny again. Nobody knows why, but that's just how our brains work. Family Guy is really famous for doing that. The bird is the word. He's grabbing his knee and going 87 times, right? Right. It's all those repetitions, and you're like, this is funny, and now it's stupid, but now it's funnier, right? And it's like people have graphed it and tracked it, and like that seventh laugh is even funnier than the first or third, right? It's weird. I don't know why. But are there any other of those rules that come to mind when you're doing your writing of this satire kind of stuff, humor stuff?
Well, I love the callback. I love, setting up something and then coming back to it later, and making it a theme almost through the story, where someone just keeps bringing it up. But I guess it's the same thing as the rule of seven. It was hell when I was writing the book, because the editor kept saying, you already mentioned this, you're repeating yourself. I was like, yes, I am. I'm doing it. I work very hard to repeat myself. Leave it alone. So
the callback, and I saw Jessica throw this in there. Monty Python was so good with the callback, and I always think of the Holy Grail and King Arthur's inability to count correctly, and it just keeps coming up, and it's coming, but you still laugh no matter what. So yeah, the callback. I'm a big fan of the rule of three, and I know the rule of seven is actually another, so is the rule of three, a marketing thing. You got to hammer it 7 times. That's before they'll actually buy your product, kind of thing. So yeah, I mean that's a useful thing too. But yeah, the callback is one that I like a lot.
Monty Python is great for those, always with the horse coconut. Always comes back, right? The callback of that, and that repeated bit of comedy. It's just the physical comedy, right? There's no words there, but it's just kind of hilarious, and it comes back around. It comes back around. It gets funnier. It's like, oh, I didn't expect them to throw it in there. Like, they caught you off guard once again, right? It's the subversion of expectations. Another one of those pacing rule kind of things. In improv, also the basic rules of that, right? It's platform, tilt, resolution. Platform is what's your basic thing. Tilt is how do you spin it on its head, and then how do you resolve that spin, right? So 1, 2, 3 in the basic rules of that. Which is very interesting, because it not necessarily will be funny, but it often can be funny, right? Do that. And so we talked about, we talked about the reversal. We talked about the expectations. Talk to me about irony. That's often a confused thing in comedy and satire, right? So there's different varieties of it, different flavors of it. How do you get that to come across in your words, right? In your writing there?
That's a tough question, because I don't really ever think about irony while I'm writing. And honestly, anytime I think about irony, all I think about is Alanis Morissette, and that's unfortunate. Not because it's Alanis Morissette, but because I really like that song and it's not ironic at all.
It's not ironic.
No, it's not ironic
Biggest
at all.
meta irony
It
of
could
all.
actually be that it's ironic that it's not ironic, but I don't, with irony, I really just I don't think about it. So that's a tough one for me to answer.
Yeah, I think the most is it may be an ironic situation, and that the people think they're doing a good thing, but they're not, and they don't see the fact that they're doing something bad, and the fact that they're clueless about it is what is the only thing I could think of that would be close to irony.
Gotcha. Over in the chat, for anybody who wants to know, there's a master class that Jessica shared about irony, so we can all learn a little something together today. To get to involve into our next bits of writing. So
you guys should probably ask us questions, because if we run out of Justin's questions, we're going to get into like a dad joke off or something like that.
Yes, I'm going to ask my questions really fast then. I love bad puns. Oh God, it's my favorite thing. I'm not a dad, but one day I will be the best at dad puns.
Well, it's all about practicing.
Indeed. So immerse yourself in the greats, right?
Yes.
So speaking of that, one of you, I forget who, had brought up sort of like the archetypes, right? The clown character, the jester, not always an idiot, but plays the fool, right? And I think that's a super interesting concept that's been around for hundreds of years, right? There's an Italian art form called Commedia dell'arte, which is theater, and it is the theater of the fool, right? And you have these archetypes of different characters and people, back in Italian society, and then it's sort of grown since there, and you see it all over the world and all over media now. But there's the fool character sort of arises from that, or the clown. And so the whole idea of clowning sort of has risen from that as well. So the idea is what do they provide to the story that otherwise these characters couldn't do, right? Like, do you have to have a fool to be satirical? Can your smart character play that satire role? Is it, Zach, I mentioned before, you kind of build in that character to be the comedic relief, but is that their only function?
I think they could be a full-fledged character, but they also serve that. What I like is to have the kind of fool who is a very intelligent person, but he has a blind side, and in that blindness makes him miss everything, to the point where he is revealing what's wrong. But he doesn't. But he thinks he's right. He thinks he's saying the right thing. And a book I worked on recently, it was about anti-gun. So the guy who was pro-gun is so blind to what's wrong with guns that he keeps telling us what's wrong with guns when he thinks he's defending it. And that's the kind of fool I like to develop.
I think. I don't think I've written anything that didn't have at least a character that is the element of humor for me, but I would probably just say that like with every character that you create, there has to be an arc. There has to be, whether it doesn't always have to be like great, it can be static growth. The character could not change, but I have a change of perspective. So when I create the fools, the jesters, the quote unquote idiots, I always try to make sure that they have a pathway to relevance. They're important to the story. They're important to the overall plot, even if they bumble their way to get there. A Fish Called Wanda, and I'm trying to remember Eric Idle's character, who it was Eric Idle, right? The one that was trying to kill, and he keeps like killing the lady's dogs the whole time, and he's having this slow breakdown because of it. But in the end, he becomes a very focal point of the conclusion. And so he's your jester. He keeps the comedy rolling, even though there's a lot of funny parts in that movie, and he serves a greater purpose in the end.
Yeah. So one of my favorite examples of this is literally a book called Fool, and that's by Christopher Moore. He does his claim to fame. He does a lot of writing. His claim to fame is sort of taking Shakespearean works, sort of modernizing them, and taking this alt character view of the story, right? And so Fool is a parody or a play on the play of Shakespeare's King Lear. And I actually, when I first read Fool, I had never read King Lear. I just kind of knew the vague story. And so it was interesting for that to be my first exposure to it, where the Fool is your hero there, right? Which he never is. He's always the supporting secondary character. But what Christopher Moore does here is he shines the spotlight intensely and wisely and very astutely on what the Fool can provide, right? What he does, not only is he comedic relief, he's great at that, right? But he's also making satirical points that nobody else can get away with, right? He is that character that is allowed to do that. As Zach said, he's the character built in for that function. And even like he was a real person back in the day, right? Not this character, he's a fake one, he's an archetype, but the jester was real, right? And he could do things to the king and the court and get away with it. And it's interesting, Mickey, to your earlier point of like, it's sort of our duty to do this satire, to punch up, to knock these people down. And it's almost as if those who are in power expect it to come. It's almost as if we who are not in power expect it to happen. Somebody's got to do it, right? Somebody should say something, right? It's sort of the phrase that gets tossed around it. And luckily there are people who are wiser, smarter, have a bigger platform, right? Who can do so. And so I think that, you know, having literally a book called Fool, like spit in your face with that is kind of hard to pass up, kind of hard to miss. And so it's interesting to see the Fool played out in that way, and now you start seeing it everywhere, right? You can do some research on those listening tonight on the Fool archetype and the jester, the clown, right? There's a whole school of clowning, which, like I mentioned before, there's like the serious clown, and then there's like the guy with the white face and the red honky nose, right? Very different style of clowning, very different idea of that, but both meant to be, well, one is meant to be funny, the other one is meant to poke fun for the good of society, I suppose. Which leads me to my next question. So in college, I mentioned before that I had found the satire paper as a student touring the campus, or a future student. And then I found it and I loved it and I joined it, right? And I started writing for them. And eventually I learned that our motto for the university satire paper was, you find the line by crossing it, which I loved. And it was just like a very good way to push you to like push that envelope, push that to the next edge. And you're like, oh, that's too much. Let's step it back and go to that previous iteration of that joke or that idea. So the question I pose to you now is, when do you know you've gone too far, right? How do you draw the line? How far is too far?
I'm still off because you said the word duty, and my middle school mind it's just been giggling for the last couple of minutes. So I apologize for that. Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, basically, how far is too far in your satire, in your humor, your comedy?
I think Mickey you had said something earlier about just like, you know, the not wanting to kick a mother down, basically. I think anytime you reach a point where somebody is already beaten, there's no reason to punch. And I would just go back to that. For me, I don't know. Repetition gets you to a point where it just becomes instinctual. But just from a basic standpoint, I think you have to be mindful of real world situation and whether or not it's called for in that moment, or whether or not, you know, as you eloquently called me earlier, you just becoming an ass, you know, kind of thing, you know. And so I think you have to learn where that line is. And if you cross it, you have to have the right people reading your work to make you understand that you crossed it, especially these days.
Yeah, and for me, it's like I've always been told that it's easier to go too far and pull yourself back than to push yourself a little bit further. So, and I think we all have that imp in our head who thinks of the worst things at the worst times and always wants to come out and say it. So I think we should, you write it down, you do say the worst thing possible. And then you kind of look at it and go, does that really serve my purpose? Does this really work? Or is it just, you know, it's just me being a dick? And then you kind of pull it back. So yeah, I try to go too far and then come back.
Yeah. To your point earlier about the comics, right? That you were drawing the political satire cartoons. You know, what am I saying here, right? If I'm just ranting, is that achieving anything, right? So the too far of I'm just angry, I'm just spewing vitriol, hatred. Does that do anything? Likely not. And I always, you know, keep in mind, is whatever you're writing bordering upon trope or you know, is it one of the ists, right? Is what you're saying perhaps a stereotype? Is it sexist, racist, whatever, right? Like keep that filter in mind, because like your experience is not everybody else's, and you have to keep that. What you find funny is, well, not what everybody else will find funny. And to both of your earlier points, have a reader, have somebody else read your stuff, and if they laugh, great. If not, go back to the drawing board.
Hey, talking about the ists, this is there's actually a term for the type of reader that would help you with that if you're worried about, say, racism, sexism kind of thing, and it's a sensitivity read. And you want people to have that experience to be able to identify whether or not a line has been crossed on that.
I see we do have some questions from do you want me to read them, or I'll let
We'll let Justin do that.
Yeah, sorry, I was
Go
so busy looking at
Go
the
for
chat. I didn't notice up there. So in our question bin over here, we have a question from Robert Gwaltney, and he asks, do you feel that certain types of humor play to a broader audience than others?
Sure.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and that's the thing is, when it's a broad audience, it's like, yeah, you can make them laugh and it's great. And it's so generic, but it could be like so generic that it's only, it's like, yeah, it's that lowest common denominator that it's almost like down to where it's just a fart joke. So
It's what Family Guy has become, fart and poop
yeah.
jokes.
So it's great to hit a broad audience, but I try not to. I try to go for a more narrow group.
And just to add on that, I mean, we talked about Shakespeare earlier, and somebody sort of playing off of that. Even one of the great writers, right, had jokes for the groundlings, the people who were quote unquote lower class and had a lower education, so they could get it, the fart jokes or the ghosts or the witch, whatever, right? But he also there was higher brow humor. And we see that echoed in kids' movies, right? In Shrek, for example, they have humor that the kids are never going to catch, but you as a parent are like, oh, I actually enjoyed this. I'm not just paying $10 to sit in this theater for little Johnny, right? And then the kids are going to get like, oh, he slapped donkey around, whatever, right? It's two different levels of humor. And if you want to entertain all the people, you have to write at both those levels, right? Whoever your reader may be. So yeah, you can sort of aim for the middle, but you may get nothing, kind of thing. Or if you aim for the lowest common denominator, like you said, Mickey, you're going to get 5% of the people, right? And perhaps not even the people you want to get, or get laughing, I suppose.
The Muppet Show did that well too, because I remember I loved the Muppets. I loved the Muppet movie when I watched it in my 20s. It was an entirely different experience.
Gotcha. Ooh, we got a question about puns. We'll come back to that later. So Mickey, I want to ask you specifically a question. So in your bio and your resume, you've written for shows, right? You have written, and so I'm curious about satire or comedic writing for the page versus the screen. What's the difference in execution or approach, or how you conceptualize it? Is there a difference?
Sure. And what I mainly did was I wrote promos, movie promos, promos for cartoon shows, things like that. So I had 30 seconds to get a joke in that would be funny enough to get someone to watch that show. And it was, it had to be quick, it had to be concise, but also it had to be just a quick idea that people could get, and that also that the announcer could say and be able to convey the humor. So in fact, when I finally started writing novels, it was such a relief because I could write as many words as I wanted. I didn't have to cut out all the unnecessary words, but you really do just narrow it down to the barest bone. You probably, with what you do, you deal with it as well.
Yeah. I mean, in marketing and advertising, it is, what is the crux of the argument? What is the one truth that you have to say? You get one shot, right? And it's funny you asked that, because in my head I was thinking one of the rules somebody taught me about, like, writing an article is the 3-33 rule. 3-30-3, which is you get 3 seconds, which is your headline, to get 30 seconds, which is like your lead, right? Don't bury it. And then you get, if you do both of those well, you get 3 minutes of somebody's attention, right? You have to earn it each step. If you fail the first 2, you're not going to get the last one. Nobody's going to read your stuff. No clicks, no shares, whatever, right? Similar kind of thing to comedy. If your premise, if you don't set it up well, nobody's going to care about your punchline, right? Nobody's going to care about the story you told in between. So you have to think about it. You have to phrase it properly. And I think that's a commonality across any sort of avenue for satire, humor writing at all. Ooh, we got mentions. Some people are mentioning their shows. Okay. So let's see. Jessica Handler in our chat, she asks, who are some of the contemporary satirists that you recommend we watch/read?
I'll let you go first, Zach.
I think the interesting thing is, and you don't want to answer Jessica's question. I mean, I don't know.
That's my
Anyway,
wife. So that's
yeah,
why.
no.
Okay. I was like, there's some inside humor here. I don't get.
I was like waiting. I was like, what's he going to say that she doesn't already know?
I know.
No, it's interesting because it's sort of, okay. So like the first two books I wrote were satirical, but I was always told never use the word satire because satire is dead in the industry, kind of thing. But which I always thought was kind of just people who didn't get it. But now it seems like on television we have so many outlets, and it all kind of, for me, kind of came from SNL Weekend Update. You know, that entity becoming the Daily Show and the Colbert Report, and now Samantha Bee, and everything. You've got so many opportunities to see politics and news and religion and philosophy just satirized. And they're giving you real information, and they're passing along things that will help you understand it, but they're making you laugh in the process, possibly making you laugh at someone, but they're still making you laugh. So I think Comedy Central kind of took that and ran with it.
I've been impressed with music, people who can really get humor across the music. And the two I can think of is Tom Lear, and then nowadays Randy Rainbow is doing amazing things with the humor and songs. And as far as literature, I guess it's anything by Kurt Vonnegut. He's kind of my go-to guy. And there was a book I read not too long ago by Paul Beatty called The Sellout that had some of the funniest things, satirical things I'd ever read.
Nice. Music you had talked about, I would also recommend Tim Minchin. He is an Australian musician. He's a pianist and also is just good writer as well. And then Stephen Lynch, who's a little more bawdy and raunchy, but he does a decent bit of satire as well. And he plays guitar. And Zach, your point about the Colbert Report was interesting. So, people really got to know Stephen Colbert as an associate reporter on The Daily Show, and then he got his own show on Comedy Central as the Colbert Report, right? And then eventually he left that and went to be a nighttime host, your regular person, evening show, whatever show. And people were very surprised. They were almost jarred by the fact that Stephen Colbert as a character is not Stephen Colbert as a human, right? They're just like cognitive dissonance, could not handle like brain exploding. And like Stephen Colbert as a regular person, he's just a really nice guy, just genuine nice human from South Carolina, gives money away to charity and stuff, right? Like just genuinely good human. And not to say that his character, also with the same name, is a bad person, but just very different style of how they view and approach the world. And so, do you find yourself becoming one or the other, right? Do you find that like in having to become more comedic or satirical, that you find yourself becoming an archetype of yourself or a different version of yourself, almost as you're wearing a mask?
I actually, I actually think that it's reversed for me. I think you see a lot of my humor in all of the humor that I write, and even if the character isn't like me at all, the humor probably is.
Yeah, same with me. It's like you probably find out more about who I am and what I'm concerned about, because the satire, is a device to talk about something that's important to me, and it's just easier to do it through humor than to come out and do it in a dramatic way. So yeah, I think it's more me. And it's funny because now I think about it, Colbert, when he was doing the Colbert Report, he was playing the fool. That he had developed a fool character he played for years.
Yeah. Another example of that, bringing it back. Mickey with the callback, +2 points.
Ding, 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 ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Yes. Also an improv thing, right? Bring it back. Two other shows come to mind for me as well. I would say the Chappelle Show, which just got re-released on Netflix, and now there was some hullabaloo with him not getting money for his own show. Now they're actually paying him, so now everybody go watch it on Netflix because the man's a genius. His comedy as well as his sketch show, the Chappelle Show. Go watch that. It's freely available, the first 2 seasons of it at least, on Netflix. The man is a comedic genius, and his satire there is just It's beautiful. I mean, people have been, what is it? Key and Peele is another one. He makes a joke eventually that like Key and Peele, they're pretty much doing my show every night kind of thing, right? When they were still on, right? They've since gone off the air and done bigger, better things. But you know, he cracked that open, and that has now become a new form, right? That he developed. The one that always stands out to me is the show of pardon me, the episode where he is a black man playing a KKK leader, right? But he's blind and doesn't realize that he's black. Like it is so perfect. It is just like, and that was one of the most controversial episodes, but it is one of the best ones because it bears to light all the idiocy of it, right? Same to your point, Mickey, about your character with the NRA gun guy, right? He just is not even realizing how bad the things that he's saying are, how stupid they sound in saying them, and he just kind of makes your point for you, kind of thing. And then I'm always people laugh at this, but South Park is it's
Yeah.
sometimes stupid. It's sometimes really for kids, right? Well, it's never for kids, but like, you know, very kiddie level kind of jokes, poop and fart jokes,
Mhm.
right? But you know, it's always somebody smarter than me did an analysis of this, and they said like it's the wisdom of 7-year-olds that remind us how stupid we're being, right? Like, you know, why does it take a child to remind the entire city of South Park that, man, they really shouldn't do this thing, right? Like you shouldn't be allowing the beavers, right, to make Beaver Dam and like cause the whole hurricane, right, and then the flooding, right, like that episode, and it kind of waterfalls from there. But you know, it's the children, quote unquote, are playing that fool character because they're kids and therefore they're supposed to be foolish, but really they're wiser than all the adults.
Yeah.
And
And
then
those, oh, I was just saying Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they do that well. I mean, even if you look at the movie they made, Basketball, you know, it
I didn't know they made
really,
that.
yeah, a parody and satirize the modern athlete and professional sports in a ludicrous way, and it's so wonderful to watch.
I recall that movie. I recall liking it. I did not know it was them, and it's funny to see those things
Well,
come
yeah,
together. Like, oh
yeah, they're
yeah, that
actually,
makes
yeah,
sense.
they're actually in it, and
Okay.
no, they're very good. And the what was it, the Book of Mormon? Is that what
Yes, I was about to say
they're yeah, yeah. I mean, just great.
the Broadway play, and it's funny.
Mhm.
So I'd done some research on the two of them, and I forget who's the main writer for that, but one supported the other. But his dream, even before he started writing South Park, was to write a Broadway musical. And so you'll notice, with that in mind, there's a lot of musical elements and like musical numbers in South Park,
Mhm.
right? That he just finds a way to work that in and like practice that craft. Eventually, he got to do it on
Yeah.
stage, lampooning Mormonism, right, and religious ideologies, right, to that extreme, which
Mhm.
is it's a phenomenal piece of theater. Like I'm not big into theater, Broadway musicals like that, but it is some of the best theater I've ever seen.
Mhm.
So I highly recommend if you can get a recording of that anywhere, somebody across the world, find that, do that, watch that.
Definitely,
When things are
definitely.
back in person, find a production of it. It is
Mhm.
well worth your time. Um, let's see. Oh, we got Jess is kicking butt and keeping up with all the references we're having over
She's
here.
awesome. She's awesome. If anybody wants a copy of the chat when this is done, because she always throws so many links in there, just hit me up because I can get that for you.
Nice. Zach, we have a question for you in specific from Dawn in our chat. She's
Okay.
asking, in your new novel, The Weight of Ashes, she says, I'd say one of your characters, I'd say of your characters who had the clearest view was blind without his glasses. Would that be irony sneaking up on you?
Yeah, I guess so, Don. I suppose we're talking about the character Mo, when he loses his glasses. But yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Sneaky, sneaky irony,
Sneaky
says
irony.
Jess in the chat.
I mean, again, I'll go back to it. I'll go back to it. I don't really think ironically when I write. So if it comes off at all, then that is a happy little accident.
We did have a question about puns. And
Yeah.
this genuinely came in somewhere in the thread. It's not just me trying to work in puns.
No,
Where
sure,
does
sure.
that
It
fit
was.
in all of this world here? Where does that play?
I've never been good at puns, so but I love them. I think it's just another good, arrow to have in your quiver. So
Puns are great. I'm more like the straight up bad joke person than the puns. But definitely always a place for puns. And I mean, Justin, do you want to fire a pun away? Do you want to get that off your chest?
No, I don't have one in my chest right now. It's just I'm not taking the light here. This is for me to shine a light on you two. But no,
Yeah.
there's in improv, there's a game that we play, and it's, you know, the saying is that a laugh is as good as a groan, right? And it elicits some reaction from your audience, from your reader. And so, you know, there's like a pun off kind of game where you kind of go and say things, but yeah, I think that puns, people talk crap about puns, but I think it's actually very smart when you can rattle those off quickly, and it's just like your single one-liner, right? That Mickey, that 30-second ad spot, you know, you got to hit it. You got to hit it right. You got to hit it quick, or else it's going to fail. And when it lands, it lands well, or when it kind of half lands, it's like, groan. I guess I get what you're saying, but you know, you're getting somebody to take an action, whether that is to laugh or to think of your horrible human, right? So, you know, for better or worse, puns get stuff done, right?
Benji says Justin looks like he's an A cup. He has nothing on his chest.
Thank
Good
you.
one,
I think.
good one, Benji.
Guys, we are at time. So is there anything else that you guys want to talk about funny wise that I didn't bring up already?
I just think if you want to, if it's not something, especially if it's not, then it doesn't come naturally to you, and you want to understand humor better, that you find the funny people and you observe them, you watch them, or you read a lot of Yogi Berra quotes, you know, whatever you want to do. I was reminded because of observing, yeah, I think that's, I think being able to understand the way people get laughs, and then going back to the emulation or straight up stealing until you understand it, is a great way to sharpen your skills with that. And also, just because I love her so much, go watch the Carol Burnett show if you never did, because that was some of the best humor I ever saw growing up.
I always try to find a way to flip it. You know, it's like I look at the situation and then I try to just flip it upside down. One, to find the humor, but also to find the deeper meaning behind it as well.
So folks, your takeaway here is, as always, go learn from the greats. Go watch, read, listen to some comedy, right? Some satire, some humor, absorb it, swim in it, take it in. If you want to be a funnier human, if you want to be a better writer with some comedic elements in your stuff, if you want to lampoon the man and make society better for it, go learn from those who've done it before and who's done it well. And with that, folks, that is all I have for this evening. I thank you so much for joining us for this satire-focused event. Hopefully you got a few laughs. Hopefully you learned a couple things from these two gents here, and maybe I said something useful as well. But it's been a pleasure chatting with you all. And Jess, thank you for keeping stuff going, and all of the references we made, all the links out to that in the chat thread. There'll be a recording of this to see later. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Go out and be beautiful fools.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it.